They say a mother's love is unconditional. That's the lie we tell ourselves to justify the pain. That's the illusion I clung to when the message came through. A short vibration on my phone while I was cutting strawberries for a pie. Just a little buzz, almost apologetic. I wiped my hands on the dish towel and picked it up, still humming the old tune Emma loved. You Are My Sunshine. It was from Matthew. Hey, Mom. Just wanted to let you know you won't be coming on the cruise. Chloe thinks it should just be a family trip this year. Hope you understand. That was it. No punctuation at the end, no call. Just a plain, lazy afterthought of a message. As if I was being gently ushered away from a dinner table where I'd sat every night for 30 years. I read it again. And again. You won't be coming, Chloe thinks. Just a family trip. And there it was. That word. Family. Was I not family? Was I not the one who gave birth to him on a freezing February morning in 1982, with no epidural, and a nurse who kept telling me to breathe while his father was out in the parking lot arguing with a meter maid? Was I not the one who worked overtime at the hospital just to afford his band camp trip in middle school? I stared at that message so long, the screen dimmed. My hand, now sticky with sugar and memory, hovered over the keyboard. I wanted to ask why. I wanted to say, but I gave you the house. I wanted to remind him that I was the one who rocked Emma to sleep every night when she had colic, while Chloe claimed migraines and hid in the dark bedroom. I wanted to scream, I'm your mother. But all I typed was, okay. 2 letters. That's all I had left in me. I didn't know right away that Chloe's parents were going. That detail arrived like a punch 2 days later, wrapped in pastel filters and hashtags. I don't follow Chloe on Instagram, not anymore. But my friend Marianne does. Marianne's daughter used to work with Chloe before Chloe got her promotion and lost touch. Did you see this? Marianne asked, handing me her phone over coffee. There they were, Chloe's mother in a floral maxi dress, laughing beside Chloe, who had her hand on Emma's shoulder like she'd won her in a custody battle. Matthew stood behind them, holding up a piña colada and grinning like he'd never heard of betrayal. Chloe's dad was giving Emma a piggyback ride on a white sand beach in Santorini. The caption, Family Cruise 2025. Making memories with our favorite people, Sautre blessed, Sautre just family. Favorite people, just family. I handed Marianne her phone with shaking fingers. Looks like they're having fun, I said. She didn't press. She never does. That night, I pulled the folder out from the back of my desk drawer. The deed. The house I gave them. It wasn't a full transfer, not technically. I'd kept a clause, a silly thing at the time, about retaining joint ownership until Emma turned 5. Just in case, the lawyer had said. Emma would be 5 next February. I didn't sleep that night. The bedroom was too quiet, too full of the ghosts I'd invited in. The ones I called sacrifice, loyalty, and love. I lay there, hands folded on my stomach like a corpse, staring at the ceiling fan as it turned and turned. I remembered the first time Chloe came to dinner. She wore heels too high for our uneven driveway and a perfume that made me sneeze. But she smiled sweetly, complimented my lasagna, and called me Mrs. Aldridge. That's what did it, the politeness. The way she was always just a little too perfect. I'd been a nurse for 27 years. I knew how to read people, and Chloe read like a prescription label. Precise, intentional, with a long list of side effects in fine print. Matthew fell for her within weeks. I tried to be happy. Truly. She was organized, well-spoken, ambitious. But she never looked at him the way I used to look at his father, even in our worst moments. And she never once asked me about Matthew's childhood. Not one story, not one photo album. It was like she wanted a husband with no past, a son with no mother. But I let it go. Because he was happy. Because he said she made him feel seen. Because the wedding was beautiful, and the reception was tasteful, and everyone smiled for the pictures. And then came Emma. And I dared to hope. For a while things were good. Chloe was tired all the time, and Matthew was overwhelmed, so I became the bridge. I changed diapers, I sang lullabies, I rocked Emma to sleep while Chloe posted filtered snapshots of motherhood online. I didn't complain, not even when they asked if I could watch Emma overnight. Then 2 nights. Then a week while they went to reconnect in Maui. And I still didn't complain when they asked me to consider downsizing. "It's not that we don't want you here," Chloe had said, hand on her stomach again. She always used her pregnancy like a shield. "It's just, you're alone in that big house, and Emma would love the yard." So I packed my life into boxes and moved into a 1-bedroom rental 2 towns over. They sent me thank you flowers. Carnations. I thought about calling Ruth, or Marianne, or even Grace from the church, who always brought lemon bars to potluck and asked how Emma was doing. But I didn't, because saying it out loud would make it real, and I wasn't ready for that. Instead, I opened the photo album. Matthew, age 6, dressed as a cowboy for Halloween. Emma in a duck costume. Chloe, barely in the frame, holding her wine glass at a baby shower. Me, always behind the camera. I sat with the album in my lap, letting the silence fold around me like a shroud. And then, I made the decision. I picked up the phone, not to call, to text. "James, it's Carla. I need to talk about the property transfer. Are you available tomorrow?" James was my lawyer, a kind man in his 60s who still wore sweater vests and called me Ms. Aldridge, even after I told him to stop. Because if I wasn't family, then they weren't heirs. And I was done pretending. The key still fit. They hadn't changed the locks. Why would they? They didn't think I'd ever come back. Maybe they didn't think of me at all. I pushed open the back door, the one that creaked on the lower hinge. The kitchen light was off, but enough afternoon sun poured in through the windows that I didn't need to flip a switch. The curtains swayed slightly in the summer breeze. They were the ones I'd sewn 15 years ago, white with little blue forget-me-nots stitched across the border. Forget-me-not. The irony would have been laughable if my throat hadn't been so tight. I stood in the middle of the kitchen and let the silence settle around me. This was once the warmest room in the world, the place where Matthew sat at the island doing his algebra homework while I cooked dinner. The room where I danced with Emma on Sunday mornings, spinning her in circles to old records while pancakes sizzled on the stove. The room where I stayed up late stitching patches on Matthew's jeans when he couldn't afford new ones in college. Now it smelled like citrus cleaner and candle wax. Chloe's touch was everywhere. The copper pots hanging above the stove. The marble fruit bowl filled with pristine green apples no one would ever eat. The wine rack arranged with labels facing forward, like a showroom. A decorative sign near the sink read, "This kitchen is for laughing," in stenciled script. I wanted to rip it off the wall. My fingers trailed along the edge of the counter. I remembered when we picked it out. Butcher block, warm and practical. I'd spent my Christmas bonus to afford the upgrade. Back then, every decision I made was for Matthew's future. I stepped toward the dining room. They'd replaced the table. My old oak one, the one Matthew carved his initials into when he was 10, was gone. In its place sat a sleek, modern rectangle of glass and steel. Cold. Impersonal. The kind of table where you have meetings, not memories. But the photos were still there. They hadn't bothered to take down the wall of family portraits. Probably too busy, or maybe they just didn't notice them anymore. I walked along the wall slowly, stopping in front of each frame like I was visiting tombstones. There was one of Matthew in his graduation gown, another of him and Chloe on their honeymoon in Maui, one of Emma as a toddler, holding my hand as she took her first steps on the backyard lawn. And one, the one that stopped me cold, was from Matthew's 7th birthday. He had frosting on his nose, both arms wrapped tightly around my neck. My eyes were closed in the picture, my mouth open in a laugh I could practically still hear. His father had taken that photo, one of the rare things he gave me before disappearing for good. I reached out and touched the glass. My fingers left a smear. I didn't wipe it away. How many meals had I cooked in this kitchen? How many tears had I dried? How many times had I given time, money, energy, love, without ever keeping score? I had made this house a sanctuary, and they had turned it into a set piece. I moved up the stairs like a sleepwalker. My knees ached on each step. I wasn't young anymore. That used to bother me. Now it just felt honest. The hallway was quiet. Emma's room had a pink nameplate on the door. Emma's Castle. I'd given that to her when she turned 4. The letters were still slightly crooked from when she insisted on sticking it herself. My heart squeezed, but I kept walking. My old bedroom door was slightly ajar. I pushed it open. It was empty mostly. The lavender paint still coated the walls, a color I had picked after Matthew moved out, something soft to soothe my nights. The closet was open, bare hangers rattling gently in the breeze from the open window. There were still faint indentations on the carpet where my bed used to be. I sat down on the floor. Slowly, like folding into a place I hadn't been in years. The silence wasn't cruel. It was something else, something final. This was my room, my home. My heart poured into walls and corners. Every inch was touched by sacrifice, the kind no one saw, the kind no one thanked me for, the kind no one remembered. And it hit me. I was never a woman in their eyes, never a person with needs, dreams, a soul. I was a solution, a house, a savings account, a babysitter, a name on the deed, a resource. And the more I gave, the less I mattered. Until I disappeared. There's a moment in every mother's life when she realizes she's been edited out of the story she helped write. Not with malice, just with indifference. And that moment had come for me, sitting on the floor of a room that no longer belonged to me. Something cracked inside, not a shatter, a fissure, slow and silent, irreparable. I sat there for a long time, my breath shallow, my body still. My mind reeling with memories I could never trust again. Matthew calling me Mama, with peanut butter on his cheeks. Emma's chubby hands on my face as she told me she loved me, bigger than the sky. Chloe smiling tightly as she suggested I might be happier in a smaller place. Each moment replayed like a slideshow from a life that had never been mine. Not really. I was just a fixture in their narrative. The lighting in the background, the unpaid extra, but I wasn't going to cry. Not anymore. I stood slowly, my knees stiff. I walked out of the bedroom without looking back. Down the stairs. Past the forgotten pictures. Into the kitchen where the clock above the fridge still ticked. Loud, insistent. Time moved on. So would I. I opened the back door, sunlight blinding me for a second. I didn't shield my eyes. I welcomed it. One step out, then another, and I closed the door behind me. Not gently, with finality. It was almost midnight when I called her. I hadn't spoken to Margaret in months. Not since I stopped attending Thursday book club. Not since I began shrinking quietly into the background of my own life. But her number was still there in my phone, under Margaret Lane, T Insanity. I didn't even realize my finger had pressed the button until I heard the ringing. She picked up immediately. Carla? Her voice was steady, but I could hear the undertone of worry. My voice cracked. Can you come? I'm already putting on my shoes. Margaret arrived in 24 minutes, wearing a knit cardigan over her nightgown and carrying 2 sleeves of shortbread cookies. She said nothing as she walked through my front door and set them on the kitchen counter, like we were simply back in one of our old Thursday rituals. We sat at the kitchen table in silence for a few moments, the only sounds the soft hum of the refrigerator and the tick of the second hand on the wall clock, the same one she gave me when I turned 50. When I finally slid the phone across the table, the screen still lit with the message. She read it slowly. Hey Mom, just wanted to let you know you won't be coming on the cruise. Chloe thinks it should just be a family trip this year. Hope you understand. She set the phone down gently, like it was something fragile or contaminated. Did you respond? She asked quietly. I said, okay. Margaret didn't react, not at first. She just exhaled slowly through her nose and looked at me with a tenderness that made something sharp twist in my chest. Chloe's good. she said finally. Too good. I blinked. What do you mean? She did this with precision, Carla. Not cruelty, strategy. That word, strategy. It settled into the room like a drop of ink in water. You think this was planned? I whispered. I think it was practiced, Margaret said. Maybe not this exact message, but this direction. Yes, I think she's been laying the bricks for this for a long time. I stared down at the faint pattern on the table. Faded sunflowers. The tablecloth used to be vibrant, like everything else in my life. She called it a family trip, I said, hearing the dullness in my own voice. As if I'm not family. Margaret gave a soft snort. To her, you're not. You're a resource, a relic, a stepping stone. My hands clenched in my lap. I gave them my home. I babysat Emma 5 days a week. I paid for the down payment on their car. I even paid for Chloe's dental work when she chipped that tooth and didn't want it on their insurance. Because you love them, Margaret said gently. Because you're good. But they don't love me. Silence. And in that silence, the truth bloomed. I looked at her, blinking back the sting in my eyes. What if it's worse than I think? It probably is, she said without hesitation. Which is why you need to check your accounts, your property records, any paperwork you've signed in the past 2 years. Hell, the past 5. I stared at her. You think they've taken more? Margaret pulled her purse into her lap and opened it with a snap. Carla, she said slowly, do you remember when I went through my divorce? Of course. Do you remember how Paul was acting so generous at first? How he said I could keep the house and the car, and all he wanted was a clean break? I nodded. She pulled out a thin, worn notebook and flipped it open to a page marked with a paperclip. Here's what he actually did. Opened 3 credit cards in my name. Took out a second mortgage without telling me. Liquidated our joint account 6 weeks before he filed. And by the time I figured it out, I had nothing but a stack of promises and a foreclosure notice. I swallowed hard. But that's different. That was a marriage ending. This is... She met my eyes. Your son gave his wife full access to everything you own, she said softly. And he doesn't even realize it, because she convinced him it was smart, efficient, loving. I shook my head. I trusted him. That's the problem, she said, not unkindly. You trusted both of them. She tore a page from her notebook and handed it to me. Lana Drexler, forensic accountant. She helped me sort through Paul's mess. She's discreet and precise. She'll tell you the truth, no matter how ugly. I stared at the name. It looked too formal, too clinical, too final. I don't know if I'm ready, I whispered. Margaret reached across the table and took my hand. Carla, they're counting on that. After she left, I sat in the kitchen alone for a long time. I couldn't bring myself to go upstairs. That night, the bedroom felt too far away, too full of ghosts. I opened my laptop instead. I hadn't logged into my accounts in months, maybe longer. Matthew had insisted on consolidating everything into a streamlined dashboard for me. Said it was easier, said it was safer. My hands trembled as I typed in the passwords. The checking account looked wrong. It wasn't the balance. That was lower than I remembered, but still healthy. It was the activity. Transaction after transaction I didn't recognize. Payment apps I'd never used. Transfers to family needs. I moved to the retirement account. Withdrawals, not big ones, but steady. And none of them authorized by me. The credit card account showed purchases from boutiques I'd never visited. Spa packages. Baby gear from designer brands I couldn't pronounce. I felt my stomach twist as I opened the property documents folder on my desktop. The house title was still in joint ownership, technically. But the clause Chloe had added through her friend, a notary named Kelly, had an appendix I hadn't read closely. A clause about automatic survivorship rights that would leave me with no recourse if they updated the deed while I was deemed incapacitated. Incapacitated. That word pulsed in my chest like a warning bell. They weren't just excluding me, they were erasing me. The kitchen was cloaked in darkness, save for the dim blue light from my laptop. The cursor blinked steadily on the screen like a pulse, as if the computer knew my heartbeat was too erratic to maintain its own rhythm. I should have been in bed. I should have been asleep. But sleep felt dishonest. In sleep, you let your guard down. And I couldn't afford that anymore. Margaret's words echoed in my head as I clicked through the tabs. Check everything, not just balances, every transaction, every document. So I did. I started with the savings accounts. There were 3 I recognized immediately, ones I had used for years. One for emergencies, one for Emma, one for holidays and birthday gifts. All of them were lower than they should have been. I clicked on the transaction history. That's when I saw it. Transfer, Thauer fees $100. Emma's Learning Center. The date matched the week Chloe had mentioned Emma needing early enrichment. I had offered to help, of course. She'd called it a temporary boost. I remembered smiling, grateful she even asked. But there was no enrollment confirmation, no follow-up, no thank you note. And when I'd asked Emma about the class, she said they'd gone to a spa hotel that weekend because Mommy had a headache. I opened another tab. My checking account. The entries were relentless. Transfer to Chloe Aldridge, backyard repair. Transfer to Chloe Aldridge, medical supplies for Emma. Transfer to Chloe Aldridge, roof leak repair. Every one of them with my approval. Every one of them built on a lie. But it didn't stop there. I noticed a 4th account, one I didn't remember setting up. It was titled Emma Fund. I clicked it with trembling fingers. The balance was under $200, but the transaction history told the real story. Over the last 4 years, I had transferred nearly $12,000 into that account. The withdrawals, almost all of them, went straight into Chloe's personal checking, always labeled with innocent names. Books, school lunch, new shoes, but none of it matched what Emma ever talked about, and the amounts were far too high for any child's needs. I scrolled until my stomach churned. The most recent transaction, $3,200, labeled playground equipment. That stung more than the rest. Because I had just been to the backyard a few weeks ago, Emma had wanted to show me the worms she'd found near the swing set. There was no new equipment, no fancy renovations, just the same weather-faded plastic slide I'd bought secondhand 3 years ago, and the tiny sandbox filled with leaves. I closed my eyes. The betrayal didn't feel sharp anymore. It felt dull, like a chronic illness you've ignored until one day it drops you. They'd used her name, my granddaughter's name, as cover, as camouflage. It was no longer about being unwanted. It was about being robbed, silently, systematically. And the worst part? I had helped them do it. I took a breath and reopened the joint credit card. I'd let Chloe add herself as a co-user when Emma was still in diapers. For convenience, she'd said. It'll help you keep track of expenses without bothering you for every little thing. I'd been flattered, honestly, grateful that she considered me part of the plan. But the transactions? They were stunning. Designer handbags, hotel charges, brunches, spa services. One in particular caught my eye. $895. Amory Day, Spa and Facial Lounge. 2 days after Emma's fever broke, and Chloe had claimed they were staying in to recover. I had dropped off Soup and sat in the car, waiting, because she said the house was too messy for visitors. Another, $100. Interior Decor Consult. I remembered that week clearly. Chloe had called in tears, saying they were drowning in costs and couldn't afford to repaint Emma's room. I had Venmoed her $500 the same day, believing I was saving my granddaughter from a damp, cold corner of the house. But they'd painted all right and posed in front of it for Instagram. A crisp white and gold nursery redo, featuring a velvet chair and chandelier. I remembered the caption vividly. Creating magic for our little princess Gist blessed life. I scrolled back to that post on my phone now, my thumb hovering over the glowing image. And suddenly, I saw it differently. Not as a proud moment, as evidence. My hands felt numb. My heart wasn't racing anymore. It was just suspended, as though it were waiting for the rest of me to catch up. I opened the property documents next. I'd always kept digital copies, tucked away neatly in a folder titled House Paperwork. I thought I was being organized. In truth, I was being naive, because buried 3 pages into the joint ownership agreement was a clause I hadn't remembered signing. Clause 6.2. Survivorship rights default to the remaining co-owner upon documented incapacity of primary. Incapacity. My breath caught in my throat. All they needed was a doctor's note, a vague diagnosis, a lawyer, a whisper that I was declining, not quite all there, in need of support. And they'd own everything. The room felt colder than it had when I started. I stood up, knees stiff, and walked to the window. Outside, the street was still, the lights of the neighborhood soft and blurred. I could see the porch light of the house I gave away, glowing faintly in the distance. I had been erased quietly, like dust brushed from a mantle. Chloe had used motherhood as a scalpel, cutting me out with precision while Matthew smiled and told me everything was fine. No wonder she wanted me off the cruise. No wonder she wanted just family. Family to her meant the people she could control. And now that I had nothing left to give, now that the well was dry, I was no longer necessary. But what they didn't know, what they never bothered to consider, was that I kept records, that I remembered every lie, that I was still alive, and I wasn't just going to let this rot in silence. Tomorrow, I would call Lana Drexler. Tomorrow, I would start the fire. It was barely past dawn when I made the call. The light coming in through the kitchen window was soft and gray, not quite morning yet, but no longer night. I sat at the table in my robe, one hand cradling a lukewarm mug of tea, the other hovering over the contact on my phone. Mark Kellerman, financial advisor. I had known Mark for over a decade. He was calm, conservative, and a little old-fashioned, the kind of man who still printed quarterly reports and mailed holiday cards in cursive. We'd met through a nurse at the hospital when I first started planning for retirement. He was someone I'd trusted implicitly. Now, I was trusting him to confirm whether or not my life had been stolen in slow motion. I pressed call. 2 rings. Ms. Aldridge. His voice was bright, like he'd just taken the first sip of coffee. Been a while? How are you? How's that sweet granddaughter of yours? The words made my stomach twist. I closed my eyes. Mark, I said, my voice barely more than a whisper. I need you to tell me something, and I need the truth. Please don't soften it. His tone changed immediately. Of course. What's wrong? Do any of my accounts list Chloe Aldridge as an authorized user? The pause was long. Not an uncertain silence. The kind that only happens when someone is searching for the kindest way to tell you something you don't want to hear. I'd have to log in and check, he said carefully. Would you like me to do that now? Yes, I said. Now. I waited while he clicked through the system. I could hear his fingers tapping, the hum of his office printer, the faint sound of papers being shifted. Then, finally, yes. She has full access to the Emma Fund and discretionary transfer authority on your secondary investment account. My mouth went dry. Transfer authority, I asked, though I already knew. He cleared his throat. Yes. The paperwork was filed about 3 years ago. It granted Chloe monthly transfer rights under the category of child-related care expenses. You were present during the sign-off, I believe? A memory flickered. A day at the office with Chloe at my side, Emma asleep in her stroller, Chloe gently saying something about making things easier for everyone. She'd placed a stack of papers in front of me, chatting about swim lessons while I signed. I never read the fine print. She said it was just for Emma, I whispered. That's what the documentation reflects, Mark said cautiously. But technically, she has full rights within the parameters of child-related discretionary needs. There's also a standing order in place. I closed my eyes. How much? $500 a month. he replied. Automatically transferred from your primary checking into a secondary account in Emma's name. But, he hesitated, the account is managed by Chloe until Emma reaches 18. That's standard for minor custodial accounts, but it means Chloe has access to it, I finished for him. Yes. I sat back in my chair. My spine felt brittle. The ceramic mug of tea in my hand had gone cold. And who set up the standing order? I asked. Chloe's attorney submitted the paperwork. It was logged through the usual verification channels, with a co-signature from you. I opened my eyes. She prepared all of this. Yes. There was something final in his tone. No denial, no confusion, just quiet confirmation. Mark hesitated. Then, would you like me to initiate a freeze on any of the accounts? I stared at the wall. No, I said. Not yet. A pause. Are you sure? I want everything to stay exactly the way it is, for now. Mark didn't push. He only said, all right, but if anything changes, even slightly, you call me, day or night. After the call ended, I sat in silence. The sunlight shifted slightly, catching the edge of the china cabinet where my old wedding china sat unused. I had thought I was being included, empowered, but every signature I'd given had been a step backward, not forward. I hadn't been trusted. I'd been manipulated. My willingness to give had been twisted into a legal blueprint for my own erasure. And Chloe? She hadn't rushed. She'd played the long game. She'd taken years to make it look like kindness. The joint bank accounts, the emergency expenses, the guardianship roles, the casual signatures while I was bouncing Emma on my lap, too distracted to read. The sweet, "Mom, you're such a blessing" messages before every withdrawal. It wasn't love. It was scaffolding, construction, of a new life, one in which I didn't exist. I thought I'd been contributing to Emma's future, but I had been funding Chloe's independence, her escape plan from me. And Matthew, my son, he either didn't know, or worse, he did. He didn't ask questions. He didn't check the statements. He let his wife hold the reins and his mother hold the bag. That was his contribution. He was complicit by convenience. And Emma? She was the only one who didn't know, the only one still untainted. And I swore to myself, right then, right there, that I would protect her from being used the way I had been. I stood up and walked to the window. The house I gave them, still visible from this apartment, stood quietly in the morning haze. A 2-story monument to my generosity, or my naivety. No more. No more quiet suffering. No more hoping it would change. No more praying for gratitude. I had lived like a mother. Now, I would live like a woman. I walked to the desk and opened the drawer, pulled out the name Margaret had scribbled for me on that folded page, Lana Drexler, forensic accountant. I picked up the phone and dialed. The wind bit at my cheeks as I stepped out of the cab. It was early, just after 9 a.m., and the streets hadn't quite filled yet. The city was half asleep, blinking in the gray haze of a morning that didn't want to be born. The law office sat in an unassuming brick building, nestled between a dry cleaner and a small insurance firm. A single gold plaque on the door read, Voss and Martel, Estate Law, Family Protection, Probate. I stood outside for a moment, one hand gripping my purse, the other stuffed deep in my coat pocket. Inside that purse was a folder so full of printed statements and documents that the zipper no longer closed. Pages I had spent days collecting, days spent sitting at my kitchen table, unraveling the story of my own erasure. I didn't shake as I entered. The receptionist, a soft-spoken young man named Elijah, greeted me with a polite smile. Ms. Aldridge, Ms. Voss is ready for you. Angela Voss's office was tidy, efficient, a wall of certificates behind her, a single photo on her desk of what looked like a brother or cousin in military uniform. No clutter, no distractions, just focus. She stood to shake my hand. Carla, she said warmly. Please, have a seat. I sat across from her, setting the swollen folder on the desk between us. I've read through everything Margaret sent, she began, sliding the folder closer. But I wanted to hear it from you. Tell me what's been happening. So I told her. I started with the message from Matthew, then the transfers, the fake expenses, the Emma Fund, the guardianship paperwork Chloe had brought to the financial advisor's office under the guise of simplicity. I walked her through the deeds, the accounts, the credit cards. I showed her photos of the house, my house, and how nothing had changed to reflect the repairs that Chloe had claimed cost thousands. Angela didn't interrupt. She listened with an expression that changed, subtly, as I spoke, from professional concern to something colder, calculated. When I finished, she tapped her pen twice on the desk and said, "They've been building this for years." I swallowed hard. "So I'm not being paranoid?" "No," she said firmly. "You're being targeted." That word, targeted. It should have made me crumble. Instead, it made me sit up straighter. "Legally," she continued, "there are 3 things we need to do immediately. First, revoke any and all financial authority Chloe has over your accounts. I can draft that now. Second, move to freeze all discretionary assets and restrict joint access. And third," she pulled a sheet from a file drawer, "initiate proceedings to revoke the property transfer." I blinked. "Can we do that?" "You still hold joint ownership," she explained, "but because the transfer was part of a conditional agreement, verbal or otherwise, and because there's evidence of coercion and deceit, we can file to reverse it under constructive fraud statutes." I stared at the form. "And the standing order to Emma's account?" "That too," she nodded. "We'll suspend it and note the discrepancy. If Chloe has used funds for personal gain under the pretense of a child's needs, that falls under misappropriation." The words were clinical, but they sliced through the fog in my mind like a scalpel. There would be no more guessing, no more begging for breadcrumbs of kindness. This was now a case. Angela sat back. "I also recommend one more step." I looked at her warily. "What?" "Hire a private investigator." I blinked. "To follow her?" "To verify," she said carefully, "what else she's filed, whether there are any trusts, accounts, or legal movements you're unaware of. If she's spoken to attorneys of her own, if there's been any effort to position you as unfit or medically unsound." I felt the chill move through me like a tide. "Incapacity," I whispered. "That clause in the deed." Angela nodded. "Exactly. That's why we need to act preemptively. If she's planning to position you as incapable, we'll need documented evidence of your clarity, your mental acuity, and your autonomy." I was quiet for a long moment. Then I said, "Do you know someone discreet?" Angela slid a card across the desk. "Jason R. Webb. Discreet Investigation Services." "Trustworthy?" I asked. "He's the one I send my own mother to," she said. I picked up the card and studied the clean, simple font. I thought about Chloe's smile, Matthew's excuses, Emma's innocent face being used as a bank account name. And in that moment, the moment I accepted that this wasn't just a betrayal, but a campaign, something inside me shifted. I stopped feeling like a victim. I started thinking like a strategist. It took 2 hours to sign all the paperwork. Angela walked me through every step. Account freezes, revocation notices, affidavit preparations for the property dispute. We submitted a request for documentation from both my financial institutions and Chloe's bank. I gave authorization to pursue subpoenas if necessary. Everything felt so sharp, so efficient. Not because it was easy, but because the fog had lifted. I wasn't a woman stunned by loss anymore. I was a woman with a plan. And when I left the office, folder tucked tightly under my arm, I didn't look back. The wind had picked up, the sky had darkened, but I felt taller. I called the number on the investigator's card as soon as I got to the curb. A man picked up on the first ring. "Webb, this is Carla Aldridge," I said. "I need to talk about my daughter-in-law." A beat of silence. "Go on?" he said. I did, and by the time I got home, I had already sent him every document I had and scheduled a meeting for the next morning. The game had changed. I was no longer standing at the edge of my life, hoping to be let back in. I was taking it back, piece by piece, word by word, signature by signature. The envelope was pale ivory, no markings, no postage, just my name in sweeping, almost theatrical cursive. Carla Aldridge. It wasn't mailed. It had been slid under my door sometime before dawn. Deliberately timed, no doubt, to ensure I'd see it before the morning light had time to cast clarity on its contents. I picked it up with practiced care, like handling a venomous thing that had merely been sleeping. Inside was a sheaf of thick paper, professionally bound, the first page embossed with the words, "Durable power of attorney and limited medical proxy authorization, temporary cruise arrangement." Below that, in smaller print, "For the convenience and safety of all parties during extended travel." It was a masterpiece of deceit. Each clause was dressed in gentle language. Each paragraph dripped with performative compassion. To ensure ease of care should a medical emergency arise. To minimize administrative hurdles during absence from the mainland. To preserve the dignity and wishes of Ms. Aldridge through designated family support. By the third page, the real purpose unfurled like a spider's web. The designated representative, Chloe Aldridge, shall be empowered to act on behalf of Carla Aldridge in all legal, medical, and financial decisions, effective immediately upon signature, and irrevocable for the duration of the designated travel period, with additional protections in place should the principal be deemed unable to act in her own interest. I read that last line again, and again, until the words stopped feeling like ink and started feeling like shackles. Deemed unable. That's all it would take. A hint, a whisper, a concern about my cognition or clarity, and this tidy little document would become my surrender slip. I folded the papers slowly, methodically, and placed them on the counter. My hands didn't shake, not anymore. The doorbell rang at exactly 10 a.m. Not a minute earlier, not a second late. Chloe had always been punctual. Punctuality, for her, was performance, another feather in her halo of artificial grace. I opened the door slowly. She stood there in pastel, her hair pulled into a soft braid, clutching a leather folder and a bakery bag, as if cookies would sweeten treachery. "Oh, good," she chirped. "I wasn't sure if you were home." Her voice was the usual mixture of feigned innocence and practiced brightness. "I just wanted to drop this off and explain it in person. It's nothing serious. Just a few papers to help keep things simple while we're away." I said nothing. She held out the folder like an offering. "It's just temporary, a standard document. Honestly, everyone does it now for cruises, emergencies and whatnot." I didn't move to take it. She hesitated. Her smile tightened at the corners. "It's really just to make things easier, Carla. For everyone. God forbid something happen. We don't want to be held up by paperwork or permissions. You know how complicated healthcare is overseas." I finally spoke. "Are you expecting something to happen?" That caught her. Her expression flickered, barely, but enough for me to see it. "No, of course not," she laughed, waving a manicured hand. Well, Matthew worries." "Does he?" "Yes," she said too quickly. "He wants everything to be in order. And I figured we could just have it all done neatly. You sign, we notarize, and it's all taken care of." "Taken care of," I repeated. She gave a strained little laugh. "You're making it sound sinister." "It is sinister." Her smile faltered, the veneer cracking just slightly. "Carla, I don't know what's going on lately, but you've been acting different." "I am different." I stepped into the doorway, blocking the entrance with my body. "I'm not the woman who gave away her house in good faith anymore. I'm not the one who signs documents she hasn't read. And I'm certainly not the woman who's going to hand over control of her entire life to the person draining her accounts." There it was. Her smile died completely. "Carla!" "No," I said, sharp and final. Don't Carla me. I held her gaze. You came to me with fake kindness and legal daggers wrapped in bows. And you did it while holding a bakery bag like we're friends. We are not friends. You are not my daughter. You are not my caregiver. You are the architect of my removal. She stepped back, lips parting. That's not fair. It's not? Then tell me why this document includes medical power of attorney, why it lets you access my finances, not just in case of emergency, but effective immediately. Why the clause mentions incapacitation when I am standing right here, lucid, healthy, and more aware than I've ever been. Silence. She didn't even try to deny it. Only said, I was just trying to help. Helping someone doesn't mean cutting them out while pretending to care. I picked up the envelope, still sealed, and held it out to her. You can take this back. She didn't move, so I placed it gently in her hands. And then I smiled. Tell Matthew I'll see him when you get back. Assuming, of course, that house is still yours when you return. Chloe blinked. What does that mean? But I was already closing the door. I didn't slam it. I didn't need to. The silence was louder. I walked back into the kitchen and opened the folder I had started keeping in the bottom drawer. Each document carefully tabbed, each record labeled. One section was already marked Emergency Orders, Unexecuted. I added Chloe's newest trick to the pile, filed it neatly under Control Attempt Number 3. Then I sat down, pen in hand, and wrote out a timeline. Every incident, every document, every lie disguised as help. I had a plan. I had a team. And they still thought I was fumbling in the dark. They didn't know that I had met with Angela, that I had already frozen the accounts, that the property reversal was in motion, that a private investigator was tracing Chloe's accounts as we spoke. They thought I was on the verge of decline. But I wasn't. I was on the verge of a reckoning, and when it came, it wouldn't be loud. It would be legal, and final, and devastating. Because sometimes the worst revenge isn't rage, it's readiness. Angela's office looked the same as it had the last time I'd sat in it. Sleek glass desk, certificates on the wall, a faint trace of lavender in the air. But I had changed. This time, I wasn't there to ask if something could be done. I was there to do it. The folder in my hands was thick, neatly organized with color-coded tabs. Jason Webb, the investigator, had outdone himself. And now, armed with his findings and the final shred of trust burned to ash, I was ready to draw a line in ink and law. Angela looked up as I entered. She didn't ask how I was. She could see it. The quiet precision of a woman who had grieved and then hardened. Is that it? She asked, motioning to the folder. I nodded and handed it over. She flipped through it quickly, her eyes narrowing as she scanned transaction logs, photographs, notarized statements, and call transcripts. Page after page of Chloe's deceit made plain. Jason had tracked it all. The secondary account under Chloe's maiden name, used to divert funds from both the Emma Fund and my discretionary account. A credit card opened in my name with unauthorized purchases, high-end furniture, boutique clothes, even a booking deposit for a beach property in someone else's name. He'd found emails between Chloe and a real estate agent discussing quiet ownership, with phrases like mother-in-law funds used casually, as though I were a grant, not a person. Angela's face was unreadable, but her fingers gripped the edge of one page for just a second longer than the others. This, she said, tapping the guardianship filing, is going to backfire spectacularly. It already has, I replied. She looked up. 2 weeks ago, she filed this with the assumption I wouldn't know. I continued. She thought I'd sign whatever she slid under the door, that I'd go on being the quiet, grateful old woman with too much love and not enough sense. Angela closed the folder. Let's burn it down, she said. We worked through lunch. Angela began by initiating the reversal of the property transfer, a rarely used but powerful legal motion involving fraud, undue influence, and misrepresentation. The clause Chloe had slipped into the joint ownership form, the one about survivorship and incapacity, was now evidence. Combined with the timeline Jason had mapped out, it painted a clear picture. a long game of manipulation and legal maneuvering aimed at removing me piece by piece. Next came the asset freeze. Angela submitted emergency motions to halt all movement on the discretionary account, the Emma Fund, and the secondary investment accounts, naming Chloe as a potential financial threat. She cited discrepancies, inconsistencies, and unauthorized transfers. Each one came with documented proof, thanks to Jason. Then the cease and desist order, barring Chloe from representing herself as my legal proxy or guardian in any capacity. A certified letter would be sent immediately to her attorney, and another to the cruise line where she currently played doting mother and picture-perfect wife, unaware that the ground beneath her was being stripped clean. "Should we tell Matthew?" Angela asked at one point. I shook my head. He made his choice. He stood beside her every time. If he's shocked by any of this, that's his burden to carry. She nodded. Fair enough. By 2:30 p.m., it was done. The final action was a formal medical declaration, one I volunteered for. A cognitive evaluation from an independent physician, notarized and signed, affirming that I was of sound mind and in full possession of my faculties. It wasn't required, but it was symbolic. A silent message. You wanted to declare me incapable? Watch me outmaneuver you while lucid. Angela handed me a manila folder labeled Aldridge, Carla, Active Protection File. Inside were copies of everything: the filings, the orders, the injunctions, the medical assessment, and the statement of intent to reclaim full ownership of the home. It was thick, solid, unyielding. I'll need your signature here, Angela said. I signed with a steady hand. No tremble, no hesitation, just truth. As I stood to leave, Angela walked me to the door. You've done more than most people in your situation ever do, she said. I had to, I replied. I wasn't just losing money or property. I was losing my place in the world, in my own family. Angela nodded. And now? Now, I said. I'm not losing anything. I'm taking it back. She smiled. You've weaponized silence well. I had no choice. Rage is noisy. They expect rage. They prepare for it. But silence? I looked her in the eye. Silence unsettles them. The city was colder when I stepped outside. The wind had picked up, curling around my coat, but I felt no chill. Everything was in motion now, quietly, legally, relentlessly. They didn't know what I'd done. They thought I was still sitting in my kitchen, heartbroken over a missed cruise. They thought their plan was secure. They thought the money, the house, the power, all of it, was already in their hands. They thought they had time, but I had time too, and I used mine better. Let them enjoy their cocktails on the ship. Let them pose in matching outfits for family photos with Chloe's parents. Let them laugh, thinking the silence from me meant surrender. When they came back, it wouldn't be to victory. It would be to consequences. And I wouldn't have to raise my voice once. The message came just after sunrise. Jason Webb. Incoming report. You'll want to sit down. Attached was a single file. Confidential, Chloe Aldridge. Mortgage attempt, denied. I was sitting before I even opened it. A full mug of tea untouched beside me. My pen poised over the legal pad I now kept near me, like a second diary. The report was 15 pages. By page 2, my hands had curled into fists. By page 5, I had to remind myself to breathe. 2 weeks before they set sail, while packing matching monogrammed beach bags and booking excursions for just the family, Chloe had attempted to secure a second mortgage on the house. My house. She had walked into a lender's office, polished, calm, prepared, and presented paperwork to prove joint ownership. She spoke confidently about upcoming renovations, about her role in caring for an aging relative, and about freeing up funds to improve the living conditions for everyone. The loan? $200,000, labeled under home improvement and long-term family planning. Jason had done more than obtain the records. He'd managed to speak to the notary assistant who had sat in on the appointment. Her words were quoted in the report. She was in a hurry. kept emphasizing how time-sensitive it was, said they were leaving the country and needed everything done before they boarded the cruise. She referred to the house as our property several times. She seemed very confident that everything would go through. She mentioned the homeowner was an elderly relative who couldn't really manage these kinds of things anymore. And there it was again. That word, elderly, the new synonym for expendable. For Chloe, my age wasn't a number. It was a justification, a loophole, a soft way to say, she won't notice, she won't fight. But what Chloe hadn't known, couldn't have known, was that while she was forging ahead with confidence, the ownership she was counting on no longer existed. Because 3 days before her appointment, Angela had filed the revocation of co-ownership rights. And 2 days after that, the full reinstatement of sole ownership was approved. By the time Chloe stood in that lender's office and asked for $200,000, she was standing on nothing. The final page of Jason's report was a photo. Chloe, outside the lender's office, phone pressed to her ear, a look of irritation carved into her face, her mouth slightly open, her eyes tight. Not angry, not yet. Just inconvenienced. Beneath the photo, Jason had typed, "Application flagged and denied. Ownership discrepancy triggered internal review. Attempt frozen." There was something so poetic about that. She had spent years weaving her net. But it only took one string pulled loose to unravel everything. And I was the hand on that string now. I sat back, letting the stillness of my apartment soak into my skin. For the first time in months, maybe years, I didn't feel like I was waiting for anything. Not for their affection, not for an apology, not even for justice. I was just watching the walls they'd built crack open, watching the life they'd assembled on my foundation begin to tilt. And they had no idea. Angela called at 10:03 a.m. "Did you read it?" she asked. I did. She didn't ask how I felt. She knew. "Everything is in place," she said. "Once they return, we'll serve them the reversal order. The financial freeze is locked. The title is clean. Chloe's name is legally void from everything connected to you. Even her guardianship filing has been flagged with a pending fraud inquiry." I said nothing. "You're close, Carla," she added. "One more step." I looked out the window. The house was still there. Still pretty. Still full of lies. The shutters were drawn. The porch empty. I could picture them, sunburned and content, sipping drinks with Chloe's parents on the deck of some floating paradise. Confident, relaxed, unaware that everything they'd built was being turned inside out back home. Let them enjoy it. Let them breathe their last breath of comfort. Because when they returned, it wouldn't be to celebration. It would be to a reckoning. That night, I sat with Margaret in my kitchen. She poured 2 glasses of wine and said nothing for a long time. That was her way. Steady, respectful. She let me speak only when I was ready. I passed her Jason's report. She read it in full. When she looked up, her eyes were fierce. "She tried to mortgage your house?" she asked. "She did. And she thinks she got away with it? She thinks she will." Margaret let out a short laugh, not amused, but sharp with contempt. "She's about to find out," she said. I raised my glass. "To silence," I said. "To vengeance," she answered. We clinked glasses, not in victory, not yet, but in acknowledgement, because the moment before the storm is never loud. It's quiet, calm, still, but it carries the weight of what's coming, and what was coming for Chloe and Matthew was everything they'd tried to take. They returned on a Thursday, late afternoon, the kind of day where the sun casts long golden shadows, making everything look more beautiful than it really is, more forgiving. Their SUV pulled into the cul-de-sac at 4:16 p.m. I watched from across the street, leaning against the hood of Margaret's car, a manila folder in my hand. Jason stood a few feet behind me. Margaret, arms folded, silent beside me like a witness, not a soldier, because this wasn't a battle. It was an unveiling. Matthew stepped out first, wearing a breezy polo shirt and a tan that screamed unbothered. He looked relaxed, refreshed, like a man returning to his kingdom after a temporary absence. Chloe stepped out next. Designer sunglasses, white linen jumpsuit, hair glossy and pinned. She was carrying shopping bags, probably filled with overpriced trinkets from their family cruise. She didn't notice it at first. Neither of them did. Not the new SUV in the driveway, not the moving van down the street, not the fact that the porch plants were different, the doormat gone. Not until they reached the front steps, and someone else opened the door. The woman was middle-aged, in jeans and a college sweatshirt, holding a set of keys and a small box marked dining room. "Can I help you?" she asked, brows knitting together. Chloe froze. Matthew blinked. This is our house." "No," the woman said slowly, clearly confused. "This is the Aldridge property. Just closed last week." Chloe turned, and that's when she saw me. Saw the manila folder, the same one she once slid across my table with a lie inside it. Now it held the truth. They crossed the street together, disoriented. Matthew's brow furrowed, Chloe's mouth moving, but saying nothing yet. Searching for the performance, the script, the tone that would make all of this go away. But nothing came. I met them in the middle of the road. No hugs, no greetings, just paper. I handed the folder to Matthew. "These are the documents," I said. "Signed, filed, executed. As of last week, the house has been legally sold. The proceeds have been placed into a secured trust. Neither of you are beneficiaries." Matthew opened it with trembling fingers. Chloe snatched it, scanned the pages, eyes darting, mouth opening and closing as she searched for loopholes, missed lines, somewhere she could say, "You can't." But I had removed every place for protest. "You can't do this," Chloe hissed. "I already did." She stepped forward. "We had an agreement." "No. You had a fantasy," I said calmly. "You built a life on something you didn't own. You borrowed against something you didn't control. You took and assumed and calculated, and thought no one would notice." Matthew's voice finally broke through. "Mom," he said, "where are we supposed to go?" I looked at him then. Really looked at him. He wasn't my son in that moment. He was a stranger, one who had fed off my labor and convinced himself it was his due. "That's not my concern anymore," I said. They stood in the street, stunned. Not yelling, not begging, just broken. Chloe's face twisted into something bitter and unfamiliar. She wasn't used to losing. She was used to maneuvering, to winning, to me being quiet. But my silence wasn't surrender anymore. It was survival. It was strategy. And now, it was victory. I turned to leave. Jason followed, already on the phone arranging the final transfers. Margaret walked beside me, silent but proud. Matthew called out, "Mom, please!" I paused, turned once more. "I loved you," I said. "I know," he whispered. "No," I said softly. "You don't, and you never did." The car door closed behind me. As we pulled away, I didn't look back. Because I didn't lose a house, I reclaimed myself, and for the first time in my life, I belonged only to me.